Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going deep, deep underground to unpack the incredible physics of an earthquake. From what happens in a single snapping rock, all the way up to the colossal forces that move entire continents.
You know, an earthquake feels so sudden, right? It's this violent shake that's over in moments. But its real origin story, well, that's much, much longer. The answer isn't on the surface. It's deep inside the Earth's crust, where energy can quietly build up for centuries before it's finally unleashed.
So to get the whole picture, we're going to start small with the physics of a single rock and then zoom all the way out to the forces that shape our planet. We'll look at the basics of rock, stress, and snap, the anatomy of a fault, how we pinpoint an earthquake's origin, the huge, repeating seismic cycle, and finally the Earth's brittle danger zone, where these quakes are actually born.
Okay, let's kick things off at the absolute smallest scale. What happens to just one piece of rock when it's put under immense pressure? Turns out, this simple process is the fundamental engine behind every single earthquake.
So the core idea here is that rocks aren't perfectly stiff. They're actually elastic, kind of like stretching a really, really thick rubber band. As tectonic plates grind against each other, they apply stress, and this causes the rock to slowly bend and deform, storing up all this potential energy. But just like that rubber band, there's a limit. Eventually, the stress becomes too much, the rock's strength is overcome, and it snaps back. All that stored energy is released in an instant. That sudden violent release is the earthquake.
And this whole concept has a name. It's called the elastic rebound theory. It was first figured out by a geologist studying the great 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and it's still the absolute cornerstone of how we understand earthquakes today.
That 1906 quake is just a perfect example. Surveys from back then showed that the ground itself had been slowly warping for decades as all this strain built up. Then, in just a couple of minutes, it all snapped back, releasing nearly a century's worth of stored energy all at once.
Okay, so that's what's happening to one rock. Now, let's zoom out and see how this snap plays out on a much, much bigger scale. This process doesn't just happen anywhere. It happens along these massive fractures in the Earth's crust that we call faults.
Now, to really get how faults move, we need to know two key terms. If a fault is on a slant, the block of rock that's above the fault line is called the hanging wall. The block below it, that's the footwall. How these two blocks move against each other is what defines the type of fault we're looking at.
And really, depending on the forces at play, you get one of three main types. If the plates are pulling apart, we call that tensional stress. The hanging wall slides down, and you get a normal fault. If the plates are smashing together, that's compressional stress. The hanging wall gets pushed up, creating a reverse or thrust fault. These cause the biggest quakes on the planet. And if the plates are just sliding past each other, that's shear stress. They move sideways, like on the super famous San Andreas strike-slip fault.
But here's a really hidden danger. Not all faults are visible. Some are buried deep underground, and we call them blind faults. And they are incredibly dangerous, mostly because we often have no idea they're even there until they rupture. For example, the devastating 1994 Northridge earthquake in California was caused by a blind thrust fault that nobody even knew existed. It caught everyone completely by surprise.
So, a fault ruptures, it releases its energy, but where exactly did the earthquake begin? This is where we need to get clear on two really important terms.
Okay, you've definitely heard of the epicenter. That's the location on the map you always see in the news. But the real physics, the actual start of the earthquake, happens at the focus, which is sometimes called the hypocenter. This is the precise spot, deep underground, where the rock first snaps. And its depth? It's critically important.
And yeah, that depth is absolutely critical. Earthquakes with a focus shallower than about 70 kilometers are almost always way more damaging. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. The seismic waves have less distance to travel to get to the surface, so they arrive with a lot more energy, and that causes much more violent shaking. The vast majority of destructive quakes are these shallow focus ones. And remember, the earthquake doesn't just happen at that single point of focus. The rupture actually spreads out along the fault, kind of like a zipper coming undone. During the massive 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan, the fault broke for an incredible 500 kilometers. That whole process took about 3 minutes from start to finish. All right, now let's zoom out in time. An earthquake isn't just some random, one-off event. On major faults, it's actually part of a huge, repeating pattern that we call the seismic cycle.
This cycle basically has three main phases. First, there's the long, quiet interseismic period. This is when the fault is locked up, and stress is just slowly, silently building for decades, sometimes even centuries. Then, boom, you get the co-seismic period. That's the earthquake itself, lasting just seconds to minutes. And finally, you have the post-seismic period, when the Earth's crust is adjusting. This is a time defined by aftershocks, and it can go on for years.
Yeah, that post-seismic period is all about the aftershocks, and they actually follow a pretty predictable pattern. The frequency dies down over time, a rule known as Omori's law. But even as they decrease, the sheer numbers can be staggering. After that magnitude 9.0 Tohoku quake, Japan was hit with over 1,000 aftershocks of magnitude 4 or greater in the next year alone.
The size of these quakes also follows a predictable pattern, something called the Gutenberg-Richter law. To put it simply, for every one massive earthquake, there are a whole lot more smaller ones. A good rule of thumb is that for every magnitude 7 quake, a region will get about 10 magnitude 6s and 100 magnitude 5s. And this statistical relationship holds true all over the globe.
But here's the kicker. Despite all these predictable patterns after an earthquake, trying to predict the main event itself, that remains one of science's biggest challenges. Only about 5% of major earthquakes are preceded by smaller tremors we call foreshocks. That means a staggering 95% of earthquakes hit with absolutely no warning at all.
Okay, for our final zoom out, let's ask a really basic question. Where on, and maybe more importantly, in the Earth, can this cycle of snapping rock actually happen?
The thing is, earthquakes don't just happen anywhere underground. They're stuck in a very specific layer of the crust called the seismogenic zone. This is pretty much the only part of the crust where the conditions are just right for rocks to break violently.
And this zone exists because of a huge change in how rocks behave with depth. Up in the upper crust, it's relatively cool, so the rocks are brittle, they snap. But as you go deeper, the temperature and pressure skyrocket, and the rock becomes hot and ductile. It starts to behave more like putty or thick honey. It flows and stretches instead of breaking, and you just can't have an earthquake in ductile rock. So, on a global scale, these brittle, seismogenic zones are all concentrated along the planet's major plate boundaries. This is where you find the world's most active and dangerous earthquake hotspots, places like the San Andreas Fault, the subduction zone off the coast of Japan, and the massive collision zone that's still building the Himalayas.
And this all leaves us with a pretty fascinating paradox, doesn't it? We understand the physics of how rocks store and release energy. We know the long cycle of stress and release that faults follow over centuries. And we can even map the specific zones in the crust where it all happens. We've pretty much figured out the why, the how, and the where. But that one question that could save countless lives, the question of when, that remains seismology's ultimate challenge.